For 15 years, beekeeper Terry Ingram from Apple River, Illinois, studied the effects of glyphosate on bees. Ingram believed his research showed that Monsanto's Roundup was the cause of a global decline in bee populations. Over the course of time and with selective breeding, Ingram was able to produce queen bees who could survive the poisoning from Roundup. Ingram shared the results of his work in journals and online, and in March of 2012, the Illinois Department of Agriculture came onto his property while he was away and without permission and confiscated his bees. Ingram's hives were destroyed before he could challenge the state in court. Elizabeth Doherty spoke with Mr. Ingram shortly after his work was stolen, and then again in a follow-up interview in 2020. From the Food and Travel Nation archives, here's Elizabeth Doherty.
Right now, just to give you a little bit of background on the bee story, we have Terry Ingram on the phone from Apple Creek Apiaries in Illinois. We had him on a few years ago when his bees were taken from him unceremoniously. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Glad to be here.
So let's kind of recap what happened back then. You were raising bees, and everybody was concerned about the colony collapse disorder. Is that right?
That's right.
But your bees, for some reason, seemed to be resistant to it.
Well, it took me 16 years. At one time, we had 250 hives. We lost all 250 hives in one summer to Roundup. And it took me 16 years of work on trying to develop a bee that was genetically resistant to Roundup.
Now, how did you do that?
Well, you keep working with survivors.
Okay.
That's all you can do. And you raise them. If you got a bee that survives, you raise her daughters and try to use as many males as possible so in order to keep the genetics as clean as possible.
So you basically created your own herd immunity.
Oh, yeah. When we had 250 hives, I had bees that I had developed were resistant to foul brood. They were resistant to mites. They produced 200 pounds of honey per hive average. They wintered over without any effort. They didn't use any food to winter over. I would have trouble with having honey left over in the spring. And they were gentle to work with. And this was all done in just a matter of a few years, 5 years or so.
So do you think that put you under some sort of cloud of suspicion?
Oh, yeah. The state did not appreciate it because I kept complaining about the state and their apiary program. We had, at that time, my wife was secretary of our local Beekeepers Association. And she had sent a letter to the state complaining that nobody in the association ever saw the bee inspector. So what do you know? Within 2 weeks, a bee inspector was here at our hives. And he went into the yard, and he went through about 10 hives. And each hive, he uncapped about 1,000 cells of brood. And 3 out of the 10, he found one cell that had a dead bee in it. He said, "Oh, you've got foul brood. You should treat him for foul brood now, and that should take care of it." Well, he knew very well because this was in the middle of the honey flow. I had 8 supers of honey on my hives. I was not going to take those supers of honey off, treat them with chemical, and put the supers back on. He knew very well. And just before he left, he rolled down his window. He said, "You get off my back, I'll get off yours."
What the heck does that mean?
Don't complain.
All right. So then you said, I believe, I'm just going from memory here, because I haven't listened back to your interview, although we have it archived in 5 different places. So if I remember correctly, you went out of town and they trespassed on your property.
We went to Texas for my granddaughter's wedding.
Uh-huh.
And when I came back, the hives were gone. And we were not scheduled for a hearing about this until 3 weeks later.
I just interrupt you for a quick second. In Florida, you signed some agreement that they can come onto your property. Did you sign anything like that?
Heck no.
Okay.
They claimed you didn't have to. They could come in any time. And they said in the hearing that they could inspect your bees any time of the year, and you did not have to be there. In fact, 4 out of 5 times that they, quote, inspected my bees, I was not there. The only time I was at the yard when they came in to inspect, the temperature was 4 degrees, and we had 6 inches of snow on the ground.
But you're typically home, right?
I run a business at home, yes. I asked them at the hearing, I said, "What do you do, sit up on the hill and watch when I'm gone?"
They probably did.
They wouldn't answer. They had an attorney for their side.
Well,
and
sure.
she said, "You don't have to answer that."
Okay, Michael has a question.
Terry, you mentioned that you had been doing the selective breeding with the bees and had kind of a Roundup resistant bee that you basically custom created, and then suddenly the hives were gone. Did they know, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, know what you were doing? Were they aware of it when they came onto your property and took the hives?
At the hearing, they testified no, they did not know. And they testified that not know that I had been writing anything about the bees. And I'd been publishing the Bee Journal in the Small Beekeepers Journal for years. I had been a monthly columnist in the American Bee Journal for 4 years before that. And they could just up there stand under oath, say they didn't know I had been doing anything.
Now, was this a legitimate hearing that you had in front of in front of them?
No, it was not a legal hearing, because when we walked into the hearing officer was there, their whole sides were there, everybody was there except for me. And that's not the way a legal hearing is conducted. I've been at many legal hearings, and that was not.
They had a hearing, but you weren't there.
It's basically a kangaroo court where they go and they make the decision for you on the bench and say,
that's right,
this is what we're doing.
You're guilty. And they told me that I should pay the $500 fine or $600. I can't remember what it was. And I said, fine. I said, you can go to court and try to collect it. I said, by the time we get done, we'll find out who's right. And they never did go to court. They never did follow up on it. They stayed away from it. The only other response I got was a couple years later, the inspector had taken the bees. She called me up and asked me if I could forgive her for what she had done. I said, I can forgive you for taking the equipment, because I had oodles of equipment here. We had 250 hives at one time, and I could bring more equipment out and have the bees ready to go in just a short time. But I said I could not forgive her for killing my queens that I had developed. I had one queen that had survived 3 years of sprays and 3 winters, and they said she had foul brood, hogwash.
Does this person know how she affected humanity by doing that?
Her only experience with bees was she had helped her husband take care of his couple of hives for a couple of years, and that was her experience with bees.
See, that's my experience. That's what I'm seeing, is that they're banking on the ignorance of people, and they're using an inherent lack of transparency, which is why they didn't want to go to a real court with you to shed light on what they're actually doing.
That's right. That's right.
And we're going to go into that further. I think you already kind of know what they're doing.
The inspector is no longer with them. Her boss is no longer head of the bee program. I mean, they knew absolutely nothing about bees. It was just atrocious. I took 2 frames to the hearing of brood that I used, and I showed them one frame had sealed cells on it, and it had been dead for probably about 4 or 5 years. And I asked them if that was one of the frames that they would call foul brood. And they said, well, they don't know. It might be. They'd have to send a sample into the lab. I said, no, I'm a beekeeper. I have to decide when I come across this frame right now, does it have foul brood or does it not? I've got to make that decision.
Right, because you're supposed to call them.
That's right. Then I gave them another frame. Didn't have any sealed cells on it, all open cells. I asked them, is this a foul brood frame? They never even smelled it.
Wow.
And that's what foul brood is. It's a foul smell. They never even attempted to smell it. They never looked in the bottom of the cells to see if there were dead brood in the bottom of the cells like you get with foul brood. They didn't know how to identify foul brood, yet they claimed I had foul brood. And yet I had this queen that survived for 3 years and survived the spraying for 3 years.
Well, they're saying that bees are getting all kinds of things now, but that this new Roundup-resistant bee will fix the problem, which was developed in a lab.
Well, I don't know anything about a Roundup-resistant bee. The closest I came was one that had survived. I was going to raise daughters from her and see how they would do. You know, that was my goal for that year, was to produce daughters from this one queen.
Well, it's quite possible your bees were used in their research.
I have no idea what they did with the bees.
There's a company,
or the equipment.
Well, there's a company called Bee Logics that was purchased by Monsanto that has been doing bee research.
What kind of research? Because Monsanto is the cause of the Roundup.
Sure. Now they want to fix the problem for you, so it costs even more money. They want to create a glyphosate-resistant bee so that glyphosate won't kill the bees when the plants are sprayed with it.
No one's contacted me about it.
Well, one of the things they're finding is that there's plant pathogens likely created by the disruption in the plants that are being transmitted now by the bees. So it makes it even a more complex issue that was all created. This did not happen in nature.
The colony collapse disorder is caused by Roundup. I've been able to document that over 20 years now. And what it does, it kills the field bees, and they don't come back. They come back to the hive for 2 or 3 times, bringing this contaminated honey and pollen into the hive. Then they die. And within a day, we've got colonies are only about half or a third of what they were in size. If we get cold weather, the brood is going to get chilled. The bees feed the queen and the worker and the young brood this contaminated food. If the queen is laying heavy and she like 3,000, 4,000 eggs a day, she needs lots of food. And if she gets a lot of this contaminated food, it will kill her. But it also kills all the young brood that's being raised, and there's no young brood that can survive to be a new queen. And so the hive collapses rapidly. It loses its field force, the young bees are killed, and there's nothing to keep the hive alive. And it can happen within a week. And this is where these commercial beekeepers that get into their hives once every 3-4 weeks, they're there with a big hive, and next thing they know, they got no hive, no bees.
And how much of our food supply is affected by this, potentially?
Far more than we want to realize.
I think it's about 60%.
You know that the FDA raised the limit on allowable glyphosate in the food we eat.
Yep. Mr. Ingram, I really appreciate your time. I am so sorry for what you went through, but it is just another example of the police stateism in our food supply. And I think that you're a very brave American to stand up to these people and to not just let them off the hook.
Well, I'm still fighting because Roundup kills birds too. And our birds, we lose our, like chimney swifts, our swallows, any birds that eat insects, our orioles. Well, after they spray Roundup, these birds are gone. The problem we have with birds is that when you kill the birds in one area, that's a vacuum, and other birds move in to fill the void. And so people don't realize that they've changed birds. There's new birds come in.
I wonder if the same thing's true of frogs.
But frogs aren't able to move in. They die, they get killed, but there aren't new ones around to come into the area because the area that they spray is far bigger than the frog habitat.
Wow.
And this Roundup can be sprayed, doesn't have to be sprayed to the crops right nearby. It can be a mile or 2 miles away, and the bees still are going to be affected by it.
Well, we thank you so much for continuing to inform people about this, and we're going to continue to do the same thing on our program, and we thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
Join us for the live feed of Food and Travel Nation with Elizabeth Doherty, now at our new time, Saturday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, on foodandtravelnation.com, TalkStream Live, radio.net, and on the Odyssey and TuneIn apps.
I love you guys. Thanks for telling us the truth.
Thanks for listening to Food and Travel Nation with Elizabeth Doherty, the truth about food and travel.